Hey everybody, welcome to the SaaS Founders Show. It's Tony Zayas, joined with Andy Elko. And we are on this show here to talk to SaaS founders, really hear about the journey all along the way, everything from the origin and the idea and how they validated that product idea and took it out to the market and where they're at now. So, Andy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, hanging out. How about you, Tony?
Yeah, doing well. You moved inside today. Yesterday you were outside. Today you're inside.
I know. Yesterday for the show, I was dripping sweat the entire time. So figured this time I'd cool off a little bit on the inside.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I'm excited. I'm a software junkie. I learned how to program early on in my career and just love to build and play with software as we've grown. So I'm excited to hear about today's founder. What do we have?
Yeah, so we have Cody Miles. He's the founder of Ashore. And Ashore is an online proofing system built for high-velocity creatives that increase 50% by automating the approval process and improving the quality of feedback from approvers. So it really is a tie-in kind of to the creative side of things. Let's bring Cody in, and we can hear all about it from the man. Hey, Cody. How you doing?
Thank you guys so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on here today. Let me move the screen around a little bit. There we go. And I guess to get started, Cody, would love to hear just about the origin. Where did Ashore come from? Where did you come up with the idea and concept? And how did you decide to turn that into a product and a business?
Well, you guys are agency founders too, so you probably shared some of the same experiences that I had. But way back in 2014, I had founded a small creative agency called Brand Cave. And really shortly into that venture, there were a few common themes, some issues that I was constantly running into when it came to clients. Those were primarily, it was often difficult to get responses on collateral that we were sending. When we sent collateral, it was difficult to understand the feedback that we were getting. So there often required follow-up meetings just to discuss feedback. There was time spent in following up. There was burnout in the number of revisions. So there were a lot of challenges that we faced even as a very small context in an agency, and I had experienced it prior in previous roles. I was a creative director at a large PR firm before Brand Cave. And at some point, we determined that there could be an automated solution for this, something that improved the quality of feedback, that automated the process, and ultimately saved creatives from experiencing burnout. So about 2015, we started prototyping the software.
Yeah, that's cool. I was going to ask about that. So it's about more than 5 years now that you guys have been at this. So what was the moment when you realized, you had these challenges running the agency in the, proofing process and all that? When did you come up with that concept to say, hey, let's build this out and let's turn it into its own product? What was the timing like for that?
It's just something that is inherent in the work that people like you guys and like I did. At the agency that I worked at, there were 2 people that were full-time employees that were staffed just to box check, right? That they were supposed to follow up and make sure projects got approved. Because in a creative agency context, unless you're in a model where you get to bill hourly at the end of the month or whatever that looks like, you're often billing at milestones, half up front, half at the end, 1/3 at the front, 1/3 at a milestone. So when those projects don't hit milestones, agencies don't get paid, right? So there's not necessarily a moment where it was like, aha, this has always been an issue for agencies since the dawn of time, right? What it became for me, though, was a process in prototyping and iterating and coming up with something that eventually we found a lot of people who shared the same issue.
And so was that the initial build out? Was that something like for internal purposes?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So what we did, we built it for internal purposes initially, but we also separately created a landing page, and we started just allowing people to sign up for a beta and allowing them to test it out. So, Ashore was a bootstrap company. We never took on funding. Ashore was funded from the efforts of the creative agency I ran called Brand Cave. So one thing we did in addition to that was I met with every major creative director in Austin at the time, and I asked them if they were experiencing the same issues that I was experiencing in running my agency. They all said emphatically yes, and then I showed them the early prototypes for Ashore, and I asked them if this was a solution that they would be interested in having, and they all said yes. So very quickly it moved from being an internal product to being something that we put on the market. So even at the time when we released the beta version to the people who had requested access, that was already 400 different accounts. And then today we're just under 15,000 users.
I'm curious about the evolution. One thing that I always think in spinning a software product out of an existing company, you have that challenge of, doing the work that feeds you and building a product, and which one takes priority. So I'm kind of curious about the journey there. How did it happen that you were able to build this product in tandem, and then what happened with Brand Cave, as the product evolved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Brand Cave funded Ashore, right? Therefore, the success of Brand Cave was paramount, right? In order to continue getting funding for Ashore, since we're not, or never went after external funding sources. So there are these parallel and dual lean priorities, right? At the end of the day, the highest priority is always to move into the product. Every service company, every agency at some point wants to have a product, right? I mean, tell me an agency that hasn't tried. And the same was true for us as well. So there is absolutely dueling priorities, but at the end of the day, the highest priority always came down to Ashore. So Brand Cave exists only as a tangential thing. It's not a company that is seeking growth. And in fact, employees at Brand Cave are transitioning to Ashore. And at some point, Ashore will have everybody at Brand Cave as well.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
It does, and that's always that challenge. Did you ever hit moments where it was hard to determine that priority for Ashore over Brand Cave?
Well, building a product is much harder than building an agency, if you can believe it. I'm sure you understand that. The thing about when you're running a creative agency, right, you typically have all the skills that are required for fallback, right? If an employee leaves, if someone's sick, there's usually some level of redundancy. But when you're bootstrapping a software company and something is on fire, and you mentioned earlier that you're a programmer, if you're not one and you don't have those fallback skills, you're a little bit weak at the knees, right? So I think the difficulty is that, right? Building a successful software company requires a lot of skills, and nobody has all of those skills.
Now, do you have a technical background, and were you paramount in the product development, or did you hire folks in to do that for you?
So initially, I hired contractors to build the first version of Ashore, and this is a longer story, but it ended up in us having to rebuild the entire product a few years after the MVP was released. I did all the UX, and I have a strong presence in the building of Ashore. It's something I'm super passionate about. I love building great user experiences. So I have a strong presence in the UX and also in the front end, even today. But on the onset of Ashore, it was originally me doing UX and other people building it. And the issue that came with that is if you don't have the proper, it's kind of like hiring a lawyer or an attorney, right? If you don't know what a good attorney looks like, chances are you're not going to hire a good one, right? The same thing is true for developers. And if you don't know what good, efficient, elegant code looks like, especially on the back end, you could be setting yourself up for failure. And that was the issue that I experienced really early on. We ran into architecture problems that made our velocity creep down. It ran into unpredictable issues early on. So remember, we launched with about 400 different accounts in a beta phase. And then very shortly afterward, it was determined that if we're going to do this right, if we're going to make this enterprise grade, we need to build it in an enterprise way, right? So at that point, we saw this as this was an MVP that just validated the idea. It showed that we could gain customers, that we could gain revenue. What we eventually did was rebuild the entire product on .NET Core on the back end, Vue on the front end, and made something that also took all of the feedback from the previous 2 years and made something that people love today. So that product was released on January 14th, 2020.
It's very cool. I'd be curious. So you mentioned that most of the team at Brand Cave have moved over to Ashore, or they're kind of in the process. I would be curious to hear how your role has evolved over time with from the starting point launching Ashore to today. How has your day-to-day changed? How has your role overseeing both sides, both companies? What does that look like today?
Yeah, it's significant. So especially when you're bootstrapping a company, it requires you to be a workhorse, right? And as long as you're on the front lines, it's really difficult to think like a C-level, right? It's difficult to think long-term. It's difficult to communicate strategy and vision. And unfortunately, the reality is, like Paul Graham has an essay on it, to be a successful startup, you have to do unscalable things, right? Airbnb started by sleeping on people's couches, right? Going door to door and getting people to sign up that way. It's a necessary evil of building software companies. As the company gains more success, I get to have a position of leading other people, right? And that's kind of the most fulfilling thing about building and growing a company is I get to take a slight step back. I can be as part and as deep into the software as I want to be or need to be. But the model of leadership that I'm taking on is not the model of leadership where there is a charismatic leader at the top directing the forces, right, and giving the vision and strategy. That's not a model of leadership that is scalable, because when you leave, the company leaves with you, right? So the better vision for leadership is something where the CEO is the architect, right, who's thinking like an engineer, who's working under scalability terms and empowering different departments to meet their own goals. So, for example, last night we had most of our team is in Austin, and we had an Ashore night, what we call them, and we had a retro on Q2. We had goal planning for Q3. In each department, the flywheel is sales, support, marketing, and at the center of it, product. For each of these 4 departments, we sat down and said, what are the things that we want to accomplish in Q3? And then my goal for all of those goals that were set is to empower with resources, with time, with advice, with my empowerment for them, right? And that's how the model of leadership has to work moving forward.
You talked about going out and getting feedback from people in your local community. I'm always interested in like the beta process, because we talk to a lot of folks where they do vaporware and they kind of pretend that they have an app just so that they can get feedback. Other folks that I've heard, they'll spend 2 years developing something before they start getting, a lot of feedback. How did you think through, like, this is the feature set for the beginning, here's who I want to bring in, what I want to get back, and how we were going to iterate on this product?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Have you ever heard of the Marshmallow Challenge? Something that
sure I have.
It was developed by the founder of Autodesk, Tom. I can't remember his last name. The challenge is essentially this: you get teams together and you challenge them to create a freestanding structure with a marshmallow at the top, right? And the team with the tallest freestanding structure is going to win. This challenge has been repeated over and over again, and the data behind the challenge shows that At the end of the day, kindergarteners tend to perform the best. Business school students perform the worst on average. Engineers typically perform the very best. CEOs do not perform well. CEOs plus executive admins perform a little bit better. And what this shows us is kindergarteners tend to perform best because they're constantly iterating, prototyping, and refining. And the cycle is just kind of moving, right? Whereas if you're a business school student, you're typically you're creating a plan up front, you're spending too much time on that plan, and then you're executing and not iterating, right? You're staying with the plan, and then you fail, right? So it's an interesting data set, and it applies to every level of building a company in software. So while we had to go through the growing pains of rebuilding Ashore, right, when we released it back in January of last year, what we did do successfully was build an MVP that validated the idea really early, and it wasn't vaporware, right? It was a real product. It came with its own issues, right? There were times that it made me want to scream, right? I got off an airplane one time. I had lost my only developer team, my only person working on the software. And I got off an airplane and I had received like 20 text messages, support messages, emails saying something was on fire, and I wanted to scream. There was nothing I could do, right? But the benefit of building software in the way we did was we had this very tight feedback loop. And yeah, we didn't spend 2 years, we spent 6 months. So with all the disadvantages, I would say one thing it did do was it helped us get feedback really quickly.
Yeah, and expand on the feedback piece. The other thing that always drives me when I'm talking to folks about this is how do you evaluate good feedback? And, you've got some folks that'll come and tell you what you want to hear. You have other people that are going to be extremely critical because maybe they've got some sort of motivation. How did you, as you spoke to people, as you had beta users, how did you take in various feedback and then be able to process that into something that was really valuable for the growth of the product?
That's a really great question. For me, it comes down to two things. First is target audience, and the second is never implementing feedback the way that your target audience wants it implemented. And what I mean by that is people who don't build software or just users of software, they think they know the best way that they would want it implemented, but at the end of the day, it's usually not something that works in the pattern. It could be anti-pattern. It's probably not thought out as much as it should be. So I take every ounce of feedback. I discredit the feedback that is not from our primary users or power users. I spend less time on the features that they're requesting. But for the target audiences that we've identified, and there is two primarily, and they have the overarching theme of high velocity creatives who send multiple deliverables per day. So typically creative agencies, and then what turned out to be a $2 billion industry in promotional apparel products. Those people, when they have feedback, we listen to it, but we almost never implement it the way that they ask for.
And it's funny. I had like deja vu when you said that, but not in a bad way, because I think that other founders have echoed that same, sentiment of their approach. And I love when I hear things multiple times, because that helps our viewers understand that there are these great ways to do stuff. So
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cody, something that you just hinted on was communicating, vision out to the team. And I do want to hear about that. But first, I would like to hear a little bit about the team. What does the team look like? You said most of them are there in Austin, and what are the roles and so on and so forth.
So we're a small team. Like Craigslist, they only had 14 developers, right? They still only have 14 developers. We have 2 developers. We have 2 customer success. We have 2 marketing, and then there's me and 1 HR.
Cool. How do you go about really, you have you're the founder, you came up with this concept. How do you communicate your big picture vision out to your team, and how have you done that along the way? Because for you, this is something that is somewhat obvious what you're out, seeking to accomplish with the product. But as people come on board, as they're, bring them on new, they begin working on a project, whatever it is, how do you go about doing that? That's something that we'd like to talk about and always find value in.
Yeah. It comes down to shared mission and values. We began with a mission statement that was really poorly planned. It was to increase the joy between approvers and creatives. That mission is a really narrow focus. What we have shifted to is a mission statement that says we want to make collaboration accessible to everyone. And what that means for us, and what it means in the long term, is that we get to help people communicate in the same language, right? If you're a designer, or you're a audio engineer, or you do video, and you send a deliverable to someone, that person may not be a professional. They might speak when they're talking about an audio file, and they're saying there's this like weird thing on like maybe the high end, and you're like, actually that's error. Or when you're talking about a PDF, they're saying there's this like ghosting on top of the image. You're like, yeah, that's opacity. What Ashore does really well is it makes things contextual. It makes feedback contextual, so you don't have to know the right language, right? And the long-term vision of Ashore is to improve on the collaboration so that the time that creatives spend in revision cycles is less, right? So the time spent in following up with approvers is less, or it's automated. Ashore has an entire suite of workflow automation so that when your internal stage is approved, it automatically goes to the customer stage, and so on and so forth if those things are needed in your organization. So making collaboration something that we can do without being on the phone, without being in meetings, that takes less time, that decreases the level of burnout in creative agencies. That's what I'm trying to solve for. And that's the vision, right? So if I can properly communicate that to employees, then we have a shared experience, right, that we can move forward on.
So you made that adjustment kind of to the mission. How did that happen? When did you realize that the mission as it was spelled out was a little too narrow and that you needed to change it? And how did you iterate to where you're at today?
It's one of those things where if I had asked any of our employees what the mission statement of Ashore was, they wouldn't be able to communicate it back to me. So it was a really simple problem to identify because no one's taking it to heart, right? So if no one can repeat it back, and if every time we meet, we're all saying it together verbatim, and you still can't repeat it back to me, I've failed in communicating the value behind that mission statement. So when we developed the new one, I proposed it to the group. We discussed the merits of it, and together we decided this is the mission that we want to use moving forward.
So for all of our bootstrap founders out there, how did you get those first beta users, and then how did you start scaling into real users, paid users?
Yeah.
I think especially for the bootstrap folks, they don't have a lot of cash to throw out in marketing. How did you make that happen?
Primarily the inbound marketing methodology.
Okay.
So beginning with a landing page, beginning with content marketing, writing articles. Again, we had the advantage of having the power of BrandCave behind us, so we can churn content out quickly. We know how to do keyword research properly. We knew how to create an effective SEO strategy. So these are the things that we have been doing for B2B technology clients for years, right, since 2014. So when we started applying those same methods to Ashore, we knew what would work and what would have the highest ROI. Today, Ashore has social media channels. It's the thing we spend the least amount of time investing in because at the end of the day, bootstrap company with limited resources, we already know that social media is going to have the lowest ROI of any B2B technology marketing activity, right? Not to say it's without merit, it absolutely does have merit. But if you're going to pick and choose where you're going to send your resources, I know for a fact that we're going to have the highest amount of resources when it comes to, or the highest amount of impact when it comes to content marketing, to PPC specifically in AdWords, and then doing HARO and outreach and link building in ethical ways.
And has that evolved for you over time? Like, you started out with the inbound, have you expanded to other different, tactics, and whether that includes, paid as well as affiliate or anything like that?
So something that we have been experimenting with lately is partnerships through other organizations. We did a month-long partnership at the end of last year with Dribbble, if you're familiar with them, the design community. And that included display ads. It included sponsored articles that we wrote on their behalf. And that was a really interesting experiment. It didn't have the ROI that I would have expected compared to our normal activities. But those are the things that, you begin kind of experimenting on and merging out from when you have successful strategies elsewhere. The other things, of course, you can double down on, and that's obviously what we've done as the resources have expanded. We also, in this past year, have taken on some reseller partners. And that has not affiliate, but actual resellers, or our product is being integrated into other software products. And that is probably the most promising growth strategy that we have.
Yeah, and for those bootstrappers out there, again, was there any main catalyst or one thing that you think really impacted that, free trial sign up or paid sign up?
Oh, you mean in terms of the actual site itself? So we experimented a lot with the website. We did things where we would show pricing on the site. We would not show pricing. We'd A/B test it. We ended up discovering that our conversion rate was twice as high when we showed pricing on the site. So that was interesting and useful to know. We experimented with the language of starting the free trial versus starting a free account. We had both of them at different points. We discovered that the free trial works better strategically as well as from a lead conversion standpoint, and plenty of other things. We A/B test on the marketing site all the time. We're constantly running tests. We also, in terms of a catalyst, some of the things we have experienced the most amount of immediate growth from, we were on the top of Product Hunt last year, and that led to a lot of growth as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, hear a bit about, the community that you kind of surround yourself with from, an entrepreneurial founder standpoint. What does that look like? Who are your support resources, people you bounce ideas off, go to for advice? I would love to hear about, that community in Austin. I know it's a good community for that space. So I'd just like to hear what that looks like for you. Yeah,
this is what I love about Austin. People here are kind. They're all too willing to share their experience. And thankfully, Austin has become a tech hub. I am very close friends with, people just like me who bootstrapped, who took $1 million company, made it a $5 million company, took it a $10 million company. These are people I call friends, and they're also very talented and experienced businessmen that I get to learn from, pick their brain on. So just about once a week, I'll meet with one of them and I'll get them drunk, and then I'll have them share all of their secrets. So,
yeah, I've always heard that, the best secrets come out at the bar. So
that's right.
Where all the insights come from. So yeah, it's cool.
Tony, that means we're gonna have to start asking our guests to drink during these. So
who says I'm not doing it already?
Yeah, that's right. No kidding. Yeah, I think mentorship is such a key piece of growing a company. Have you used any other interesting networks or groups for mentorship and just helping you, go through this journey?
So what's interesting is I'm not part of EO, and I'm not part of some of these other groups. 7CTOs is a really big one that I'm also tangentially related to. What's weird is that because of my relationships with the people in these groups, I am essentially like quasi part of the group. Like I'm going to the events and I'm friends with the business coaches, but I'm not actually part of the group. It's like I'm just leeching off my friends essentially.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. So I can't officially say I'm part of 7CTOs, and I can't officially say I'm part of EO or EOA, but in some ways.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the group, so that, obviously, the types of relationships that are valuable that come out of that type of stuff.
Yeah, so. And to be fair, like one of my friends just completed EOA and had a really, really transformative experience. So I can only say, high praise for these kind of organizations. I think they're extremely valuable. If you can't have the non-formal relationships where you can take these guys to a bar and get one-on-one with them, then yeah, I mean, the next best thing is being in a formal group.
Yeah, it's great. Now, just kind of talking back to product a little bit.
Sure.
So how have you managed roadmap? We talked about feedback a little bit, but one of the things that I always like to ask founders is, you're probably like me, and you're probably like a lot of them, is you have a million ideas, right? And you're always thinking about this. And so, how do you, and maybe it goes back to what you talked about with feedback, is does it match the target audience, these other things? But still, I mean, you have a lot of ideas. It's always cycling through your head. How do you manage that chaos and develop a roadmap that's right for your product?
Yeah, great question. So developers hate shifting priorities. So you try to limit this as much as possible. We have a roadmap that blocks out goals for each quarter of the year, right? And what we intend to accomplish. Those goals sometimes shift. It's not fun for anyone, right? Ideally, we have our plan for the year, and that's just how we're going to continue moving forward. Those goals shift when customers leave because of X, right? Maybe it's lack of feature. Maybe there was some experience that they wanted better in one particular feature or another. Maybe it was buggy. Maybe it was a multitude of things. But all of that has to be tracked, right? And those things should be shifting our development goals. At the end of the day, if I generate 10 new customers and I lose 5 at the end of the month, I'm not doing a good job, right? So churn early on in building, especially bootstrapping a software company, is the most important thing to look out for in terms of what's going to kill your growth. The saying is true. It costs less to keep a customer than it is to create a new one. So in terms of shifting priorities and how that affects the roadmap, blockers and for not subscribing, for not becoming a customer, and reasons for churn are the things that change that roadmap. And in my own ideas, because you're bootstrapped and the resources are more limited than, say, if we became a $10 million Series A company, it becomes even more important to hold the roadmap close to your chest.
How do you look at churn? We actually have talked a lot about churn on various shows and things. How do you look at it? Because I would say, there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, it could be functionality and strategy. It can be UI, UX. It can be even you brought the wrong target audience to the application. And that happens even before they sign up. How do you measure churn? How do you look at it? How do you approach?
I think that's a growing discussion in our organization, and I think it will always be, right. I don't know that we've solved ideally we want to hit 0% churn, obviously, right? We want people to stay with us for the next 10 years. Right now, on average, customers are with us between 15 and 18 months. So that's not a bad LTV. That's a great LTV. But how can I extend that twice as much? What are the reasons people are leaving? It's identifying these things, categorizing them, and then reprioritizing based on those things. So if the feedback is coming in that we have lost X amount of customers for Y reason, maybe Y is the new priority. There are also other things that can be done to mitigate churn, and these are things that we are experimenting with even right now. We spend a lot of time helping customers experience the full value of Ashore after they sign up. Every single new account is given, we have 2 customer success reps. One of them is assigned to the account. That person is made to make sure that there is the proper amount of training given and made available to the organization that signed up, that they realize the full benefits of Ashore, everything from being able to white label the URL to integrate in your email to all these other things. Making sure that there is a sequence and an automated sequence of what we call the welcome packet, right? So that here are these resources you need to know, the very first things you need to do after creating your account. Here are the second things in 1 day, 3 days, 4 days. It is making sure you have an expansive knowledge base so that you can anticipate these questions and spend less time in support calls and on support chats. And it is making sure that within the UI itself, things are properly explained through tooltips, through product tours, through a UI and UX that makes sense and is intuitive. At the end of the day, there is no such thing as a self-service product, a fully self-service. We can debate this all day long. Not even Dropbox is a fully self-service product. So what are the things that can be done to mitigate it?
Yeah, that's great. One other thing that kind of goes into churn for me a little bit, and I think that a lot of founders struggle with, is pricing. How do we price our product? How did you guys get there? Has it been a constantly changing journey?
Yeah.
Did you go out and compare it? What kind of tactics did you take that determined pricing for your product?
Really early on, our pricing was about half of the market, what the market was charging for a product similar to ours. And we could get away with that because 1, we were validating the idea, 2, we're bootstrapped. So I'm not beholden to anybody to do that. Of course, I'm in the business of Ashore because I want to make money for myself and my family, right? So early on, it was more or less a marketing strategy to gain users. During beginning in March and throughout COVID, we've raised our pricing 3 times. And it comes down to 1, we always want to beat our customers, provide more value than they do, and also at a more affordable rate than they do. So that's important, and we can do that because we're bootstrapped. But 2, we want to know what our threshold is. How much is the market willing to pay? And I think, for a lack of a more definite strategy, it's experimenting, A/B testing on pricing. And that's what we've been doing. So we've increased pricing 3 times in the last year. Our product, our SKUs skew toward enterprise. So even now, we're probably pricing too low for our product because people are always, more often than not always, but more often than not, taking our highest end pricing.
Kind of just to add on to that too, how did you determine to gear towards enterprise versus mid-market small business? Was there something conscious about that, or how did you come to that?
It's probably a misnomer when I say enterprise. We have a pricing plan called enterprise, which for us means unlimited everything, unlimited users, unlimited proofs to send per month. It's probably just as true to say that SMBs will purchase the enterprise plan.
Okay. So when you said that, you're not necessarily saying that you're trying to go after enterprise clients. It's more that pricing structure. That makes sense.
The sales cycle for our enterprise clients is twice as long, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes people will make a purchase decision within the first 20 days after signing up for Ashore. Sometimes it is on the first day. It's not uncommon for that to be a single day decision. So the markets that we are going after probably, so here's the thing. If you look at proofing software in terms of, it's under the umbrella of project management, right? So project management being the largest umbrella, right? And then you have a niche of project management, which is proofing requirements. If project management software requires an entire creative agency, not all of them are sending deliverables for approval, right? So that's a segment of those people. So, I mean, we have Coca-Cola and Adidas using Ashore. We have BuzzFeed using Ashore. Because of the nature of proofing software, it's a smaller team at these organizations than all of Adidas or all of Coca-Cola, for example. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the sales cycle is always longer for enterprise companies. And that's mostly because they have stricter requirements, right? They want to see penetration tests. They want to see other things. But the average number of users in a given account will range anywhere from 6 to 20 on average, not huge amount of users. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cody mentioned, the attention that you guys pay to making sure your customers understand the capabilities that Ashore has and really how to use it and all that. And that makes a lot of sense. I'd be curious to hear how that relates to what channels do you guys have in place to collect user feedback? And then how do you process that? So how do you organize it, prioritize it, address it, so on and so forth for purposes of, future growth, whether that's something needs to go into the FAQ and the support chatbot, or if it's something to be added to roadmap. So just curious, the collection and processing of the feedback.
I would say 90% of the feedback, this is an estimated number, I don't know it off the top of my head, 90% of the feedback that we receive is in-app through the chat. So we have a bot collecting the data, and then if a support person is online, then we're immediately responding and working out whatever that feedback might be, right? Whether it's like, I don't know how to use this, or I have a feature request or whatever. All of that feedback is added to our roadmap, no matter what. If we have a certain feature card, we are tagging the customers to that card. And later on, whenever the feature is released, we always let those specific customers know as well. But that data also helps us prioritize. We talked earlier about that shifting roadmap priority and how features get rearranged. That is ultimately how we're doing that. So customers appended to feature cards, we know the priority, because if the customer is within our target audience and there's a lot of those requesting a specific thing, we know that should become a priority.
Now, over the time that you've done this, has there been any major roadblock or challenge that you can share with our group? Just because I think we learn the most from those big challenges or mistakes that we make. So, I'm sure the journey has not been smooth sailing. What can you share with our viewers about, what you've run into?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I shared it earlier. The biggest challenge that we ran into was our MVP, right? It was a product that worked okay, right? But it had velocity issues. It had architecture issues. The biggest challenge was making the decision to rewrite. People say that there is not an ROI in rewriting. That's probably true for the most part, unless you're going to have a much higher velocity in the rewrite, after the rewrite. The challenge was also, not only was it and complete rewrite, completely new UI, completely new features, redone everything. We had to also migrate users from the original product to the new product, which had a higher pricing immediately when we launched it.
Right.
And convincing users that it was worth paying twice as much for something that did really similar features to what they were used to. That was a challenge, but it was a much harder challenge getting off that airplane. And I had no developers working on my product, and it's on fire, and my inbox is full of support chats. And the feeling of helplessness in that kind of situation, it is not something I would ever want to repeat again.
So, we know that you mentioned outsourcing the first beta build and then bringing people in. And one of the biggest challenges I think right now is finding good software folks. Everybody's facing it at this juncture. A lot of our founders talk about finding a CTO, a partner, because it's such a big challenge that they need to really entice someone to come in and be part of the company. So how did you solve that problem? How did you find the right folks? And, especially in an area that I think is very, there's a lot of demand and very little supply.
Andy, you hit the nail on the head. So the answer is finding a CTO. And I did. Our CTO is a savant. He's a incredibly talented person with great leadership skills, who knows what good code looks like, who covets beautiful, elegant code bases, but also balances that with business priorities and making sure that our goals are accomplished. He's the reason for Ashore's success today.
How'd you find that person? I mean, again, for those folks that are out there maybe thinking about building a product and they're going, where do I even start? How did that work for you?
Yeah, he's a friend, and
okay.
And the challenge there was I knew who he was. I knew who he was as a person. I knew that I could trust him. The challenge was convincing him to join our product, and taking that big shift in responsibility into his life.
Yeah. Okay.
I got lucky in that regard, because we talked a little bit earlier. It's like looking for developers is like finding an attorney. If you don't know what to look for, you're going to mess it up. And I clearly did when I contracted out the first time. I acted in CTO roles that I wasn't capable or qualified to make. So I can do things on the front end, but the back end's a mystery to me, right?
Yeah.
So when we were running into architecture issues that caused velocity problems and caused bugs throughout the app, it was, it creates that feeling of helplessness. But when you have a partner there who is looking out in the best interest of the app, it's a good feeling. There's a lot less stress.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say 9 out of 10 of our founders have found their CTOs or partners through, networking or connections or someone that they've worked with before. I have a good friend that's an entrepreneur, and he always has a bench list. He's out there, if he meets somebody, even if they're not ready to move or he can't afford them, he puts them on a bench list and stays in contact with them. So I think
that's a great idea. Yeah.
For those great employees, I mean, that's a little bit of what it's about is networking and staying in touch with folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I've only recently truly understood the value of what it's like to have a good tech network, and I've taken advantage of it since I've realized that.
Yeah, it's great.
It's probably for a role like mine in growing a software company, being isolated or reading blogs or trying to do anything else other than be with people who are successful is the wrong move.
So Cody, I'd like to hear what does the next 12 months look like for Ashore? what do you guys have your eyes set on, and what are the plans?
Yeah, we have major development goals for Q3 and Q4, and we're being aggressive with it. We're hiring another developer at the moment to try to meet those goals, and we are also completing, as of Friday, a major integration with a reseller who will then be releasing their product to their customer base of around 9,000 customers. So that will be an excellent influx for us as well. So working through our new features, taking on the additional hires, and then supporting our partners is going to be what the next at least 6 months of Ashore looks like. I hate to say 12 because in the startup world, the cycles are much shorter, right? And we're iterating quicker. So 12 months is, I can't tell you.
Quick question on those reseller partners. I know you mentioned that was one of the biggest growth tactics you've had. How did you identify those partners and like reach out to them, engage them? What did that look like?
In every case, it was them reaching out to us.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah, and I think that's a benefit of the content marketing and the SEO strategy that we've had until now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great. What do you see? Just that same question we had before of challenges. Is there anything that you see in the horizon that your company needs to plan for and say, okay, this is something we need to think about how to get over?
Mm-hmm. The challenges that I'm focused on currently are looking at ways to improve on churn, to reduce churn. So part of our quarterly meeting and the goals that we set last night for the foreseeable future, we developed a strategy for doing that. So the challenge now is acting on that plan and seeing what happens with the experiment. Everything at this point is all prototyping and iterating. So we'll find out.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, churn tends to be one of the biggest things. I mean, you get to a certain point and then really it needs to be paid attention to from day one. But
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But that, most, founders that I talk to at first, they're not always as focused on it, but at some point that does end up being a very key piece of what they're focused on for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And early on, you're just like, can I even get a customer? Right. Will they want to pay for this at all? If you can get them to pay for it, that there's potential there. If they stop paying for it, there was just something that went wrong along the way. And, that's something we can optimize, but we have to first prove the product first. And so that was early, that's what every founder has to experience moving early on.
Yeah, totally.
Cody, before we dive into our last question here and kind of wrap up the hour, where can our viewers find out more about Ashore, see what you guys are up to, and even follow and connect with you?
Yeah, I am always happy to make myself available to anyone. So anybody can reach out to me, emailing me at cody@ashoreapp.com. You can find out more about our product at ashoreapp.com. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Ashore App. It's all pretty straightforward.
Very cool.
Awesome. So the question that I always like to ask at the end of the show is, if you were able to go back in time before you started your app and sit down and have coffee with yourself, what advice would you give to your past self about this, upcoming journey and what you're about to embark on?
Man, that's an interesting question. I don't think I would have listened to me if I would have said anything. But I would have said, focus on the people, empower them. Don't try to be the person who knows it all. Don't try to be the source of truth in anything. The people that are in this organization that you've hired are more than competent in leading their own departments. So I would have leaned into that more. And I think the leader who puts themselves at the top, that's an insecurity, so working through those things, I think, would have been what I would have recommended.
That's awesome.
Well, Cody, awesome. Thank you. This has been a very thoughtful and insightful conversation. We really appreciate you spending your time here. So thank you for joining us here today. And to our viewers, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you again same time next week. And with that, everybody, have a great week.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks, everybody.